Good.
We'll have tons of time for questions and answers, but I just want to start by saying thank you for coming out. Yesterday we had an event on Beacon Hill and it was raining and we still got about 10 or 15 people out, and it's so great to have you here. Thank you very much for joining us. I want to start with the land acknowledgement that we're in the traditional territories of the Sooke First Nation. But also in this riding of Esquimalt, Saanich, Sooke, we have the Pachidat to the north, we have the Secwemp at Beecher Bay, the Esquimalt and the Songhees First Nations, and also the Wisanic First Nations. And I always love to start off that way because Indigenous issues are near and dear to my heart. My first job in law was with an Indigenous lawyer named Willie Littlechild in Alberta. On a reserve, you would know the Hobima Reserve, a four-band reserve. When I worked there, it had the highest suicide rate in Canada. A very difficult place for people to live. And it's always been near and dear to my heart. And one of the great things that Sooke has been doing is the truth and reconciliation process. I know many of you have been involved in that. And it's so great to have a community like Sooke leading the way on truth and reconciliation and sort of setting an example for the rest of Canada, because I haven't heard of any other group that gets together like the Truth and Reconciliation group here in Sooke, and it's lovely to be part of that. My favorite memory of that group is when we had, I think, 14 or 15 young Greens who came out about a year ago. I think it was in June a year ago, just to hear what was being said. It was very moving. And I think they were very moved as well, these young Greens who were learning about campaigning and so on. And it provided a sense of energy to that whole Young Green program. But I also noticed for the Truth and Reconciliation folks, it provided a sense of energy there too, which was lovely to see. Many of you know I live in Saanich. I live on Gorge Road. And I've done a lot of campaigning out here in Sooke. In 2015, and then for the referendum, and many of you were campaigning on the referendum too. And then in the last 2019 campaign, a lot of door knocking out in Sooke and meeting very passionate people. And my sense is that there are more and more people in Sooke coming into the Green Party fold, which is very encouraging. And I think in the next election, we're going to win this riding for the Greens. And there's a sense of energy that not just here in Esquimalt, Saanich, Sooke, but also across the country, there's a building sense of energy. My wife is here and I want to acknowledge her, Annemiek. We have one daughter of our 4 daughters who are home with us, Rebecca. She's going into grade 12 at Esquimalt High, and she came back from an exchange in Finland, so we were quarantined until last week. And so it's kind of like a feeling of liberation to be out of quarantine, which is lovely. And my last word of introduction is, j'aimerais dire qu'on est un pays bilingue et un parti bilingue au Parti vert, et c'est très important. Si vous voulez poser une question en français, vous êtes le bienvenu. J'imagine qu'il y aurait même une personne qui va nous poser une question en français. So you're welcome to ask questions in English or French. I'm going to do a very brief introduction about my vision for Canada, for the Green Party, and then what I have to offer, and then we'll turn it over to questions. All right? So for Canada, what I'd love to see is Canada becoming a leader again internationally. We used to be a leader, but as we could tell from that Security Council vote a couple of weeks ago, we're not seen around the world as a leader anymore. And that's really unfortunate because we're a very wealthy country, we have huge privilege here, and we should be leading. And we should especially be leading on climate action. We are the 4th largest producer of fossil fuels in the world. And if we could show the way on how to get off fossil fuels and onto renewable energy, it would be a huge contribution internationally. You know, if we could build this east-west electrical grid that we campaigned on last time, powered by renewable energy, a lot of my relatives in Alberta, I think, would buy into that positive vision. I was born in Edmonton. I have many cousins, and one of my daughters works in Calgary at Foothills Hospital as a young doctor. And if we can convince those folks in Alberta to come over to the Greens, we can convince anybody. And that should be our objective, is putting forward such an attractive platform that we even win a majority of the votes in Calgary itself. So that's a challenge. I'd love us also as a country to be able to do this transition, leaving no one behind. Because one of our core values in the Green Party is a social justice value. And if we can make the transition in a way that's socially just, where we implement a guaranteed livable income, where we implement free tuition for trade school, college, and university, just like Germany and Norway and many of the other countries in Europe, and that we take a very ambitious approach on helping out people as opposed to helping out the fossil fuel industry or the multinational oil companies, which we're subsidizing in BC to the tune of $6.6 billion a year right now with funding for liquid natural gas, and which the Trudeau government is funding per capita. We're funding fossil fuel industries more than any other country in the whole G7, the 7 largest economies in the world. Canada is #1 per capita in fossil fuel subsidies, and we need to change that too. So I'd love to see a Canada where we're transitioning in an active way. And I'm convinced that to make that happen, we're going to need more Greens in Ottawa to really hold the government to account, because they've campaigned consistently on one thing and done the opposite. And I would know because as some of you may remember, I ran in this riding in 2015, and we had some great promises. We were going to cut fossil fuel subsidies to zero. That was part of the promise in 2015. And many of you will remember, we said 1,000 times during that 2015 campaign, 2015 will be the last first past the post election. Remember that promise? That one was broken within the first year. And the Liberals adopted Harper's greenhouse gas reduction targets. Same targets after criticizing them for 4 years. So we really need more Greens in the House of Commons to hold the Liberals to account. And I believe that I'm very well placed as a leadership candidate to do that. Because I know the Liberal Party promises inside and out. I made many of them myself. And one of the reasons I left was because of all those broken promises. But the other thing we need in a leader, and I'm going to conclude with this, is somebody who is perfectly bilingual on day one, who can campaign in Quebec and New Brunswick and Eastern Ontario, in places where there are so many francophones, because we should be breaking through in those places. We started to break through in New Brunswick in the last campaign. I campaigned in New Brunswick for Megan Mitten in French, entirely in French, in a riding called Memramcook Tantramar, the sort of homeland of the Acadian Canadians. And we won that campaign by 11 votes, and it was because of the door knocking. We had a huge crew of bilingual door knockers go in and knock there 2 years ago, and it's one of the reasons we won. I'm the only candidate in the race who's able to win debates, convince people on the doorstep to come over to the Greens, and who's campaigned from New Brunswick to BC in French and in English for winning Green campaigns. So that's an unusual thing that I offer, and I think it's really important to have a leader who knows how to campaign on the ground. The other thing I offer is deep experience in the Green Party. I've been the Justice Reform Critic and the Democratic Reform Critic inside the Shadow Cabinet for Elizabeth May. I understand how the party works in Ottawa. I've been to the Federal Council meetings, and I think it's really important to have a leader who understands the Green Party in all its glory and for all its faults, because we are actually not a fully operational party. We're maybe operational in 20 ridings across Canada, and we need to be fully operational in 338 ridings. And what that takes is somebody who loves organization, who loves these kinds of meetings, gets out on the ground, creates a sense of togetherness and enthusiasm and community. And I believe I'm uniquely qualified. I've been the president of 5 riding associations across Canada. I've served on the national board of the Liberal Party of Canada, in the Shadow Cabinet of the Green Party. I know how organization works. And I think what we need is a listener, an organizer, a builder, and then somebody who is a campaigner, a very hard-working campaigner. Let's not just win 8 or 9 seats with the leadership candidates. Let's really create a green wave across Canada. So we can either form a majority, or if that doesn't work, we can form the balance of power like we have here, the balance of responsibility. And then at least let's break through and become an official party in Ottawa. To do that, we need to move from 1.1 million to 1.5 to 2 million votes in the next election. And to do that, we need to be organized on the ground. So that's what I offer. I'll just conclude with one last word, which is davidmerner.com is my website. And there are a couple of key buttons on there. One is volunteer, and the other is donate. So if you are able to donate, no matter how small an amount, to help cover the cost of our campaign. That would be fantastic. I was on the road in February and March, and that was costly to get across. I made it all the way to Montreal, and then COVID-19 struck, so I had to come back. So I want to get back on the road again, and this is a bit of an experiment to see how nervous people are about COVID-19. But we were in Victoria yesterday on Beacon Hill, it worked out. This is working out too, and we're going to pick up momentum for in-person meetings. And that's our plan. So fire away with questions and comments, and thank you again for coming out. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thanks.
You seem more relaxed.
You know what? When you do this 300 times, you really get used to it.
And you're talking more about your strengths,
Yeah.
which is really, really good.
Yeah, you know what? I've
You
just...
have lots.
I
You know that. You need to tell everybody.
And during the last campaign, I got this comment a lot. You never talk about yourself, right? And I've gotten used to talking about myself. I used to hate it. I was more, yeah. My wife and the team say, talk more about yourself. But I was taught as a kid that it's kind of rude to toot your own horn, and it's been tough overcoming that.
And you're actually asking for financial support.
Yeah.
You would never do that. And that's the toughest question.
In terms of marketing, David, you are the product.
That's it.
You have to talk about the product.
Yeah, we're in a sales job here, aren't we?
Yeah, we're in a sales job. You got to talk about what you're selling.
Yeah, I've really changed in my approach from the election. It's good to get this feedback.
Yeah.
Because so many of you were saying, David, you got to talk about all the stuff you've done. So I'm trying to do that. It's still a little tricky. And one of the ways I try to do it is working it into the answers to questions, because then it seems a bit less rehearsed. But literally, if you go to davidmerner.com under events, and you'll click on the archive, you'll see we've been doing hundreds and hundreds of events on Zoom, in person, with student campus clubs. And so you just get better by practice, right? It's the 10,000 hours of practice.
It's at 10,000 hours.
Yeah. So thank you for the feedback. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Because you want to tell people what you want to do, but you also telling them how you're going to do it.
Yeah.
And that has to have experience, and that's just perfect. That's what people want to hear. Great.
Yeah, people want to hear about the experience. It's so hard to talk about this stuff, but unless you've actually done it, sorry, other way around, it's so easy to actually say stuff, right? But unless you've done it, you don't really know how hard it is. And many of you have been organizers in different campaigns, you know, hosted events and, you know, run canvases, door knocking canvases. It's really hard to pull people together, to get them out on a sunny, hot day in the middle of summer, right? Or on a rainy, cold day in winter. It takes organization, and that requires experience and skill. One of the great things about Sooke is we have organizers here who know how to do that. But it's shocking across the country. When I traveled, I went to, you know, I started in Calgary, Regina, Winnipeg, Thunder Bay, sort of hopping across. We don't have organizers. We don't have people who really understand even how to run an EDA, how to run a riding association, right? So I think some of the knowledge we have here on the West Coast, we need to share nationally to get the party going. It's so important. We have a lot of people who are good at going to demonstrations, and I like going to demonstrations too. I was at one yesterday on the steps of the legislature with the Orca Rescue Society, which is great. They had one at noon yesterday with Chief George from Campbell River. Great demonstration. But we also need to knock on doors and make phone calls and have coffee meetings and do all the other stuff that political parties need to do. And it's interesting, we're better at waving signs than at actually organizing a political campaign. And so we just need to learn, and I think we can do it. There's a real appetite for this.
I just want to say, because I listened to you the other night on the
Zoom call?
monitor, the Zoom call, and you were very good at explaining the two components of the campaign. Sometimes it's the talk of the leadership, the talk of the planning, the talk of the, and then you very nicely turned it over and said, and then there's this other side. And the other side is the due diligence of running a campaign, and that ticking off the boxes, knocking on the doors, putting up the sign, and that can really put people on the ground. But it's the due diligence and the support that's needed for that. So it was a good transformation for you. It was really well done, well done.
Thanks. Yeah, we have to link up sort of the high-level ideas or sort of the inspirational stuff with
to the ground.
Yeah, to the ground.
Yeah.
You've heard me say this before, many of you, but Obama said it's 95% perspiration and 5% inspiration, right? And so we just have to do the hard work on the ground to be able to win ridings like this one and other ridings across Canada.
It's like a good glass of wine. You need lots of legs.
Yeah.
It's not going to be, it can look really nice, but if it doesn't have the legs,
It has to,
it's
yeah.
not going very far.
That's it.
I have an impossible question for you. We seem to have lost momentum because of COVID. The focus has been on different things. And is it too soon to start revving things up again, or?
No.
You know,
I'm not talking about the leadership. I'm talking about party policies in general.
Well, it's funny. I have mixed feelings. I think COVID is also an opportunity because there's so much that we're learning from COVID-19 that applies directly to what the Green Party's been saying since we were founded in 1983, right? Like the guaranteed livable income is obviously way better than the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, right? Trudeau walks out to the microphone every morning to sort of repair the holes in the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. If we come across with a guaranteed livable income right away, we wouldn't have had these problems. More fair, more simply to administer, and cheaper too, significantly less expensive. So COVID-19's highlighted a few areas like that where we've always been strong. I noticed Jagmeet Singh came on board. The NDP for the first time is supporting a guaranteed livable income 2 weeks ago. And this is typical, right? We've always been more progressive than the NDP. People don't realize that, but that's just typical of the pattern. The Greens have always been out there on equal marriage, national pharmacare, national child care, and then the Greens sort of come along, the NDP come along after the Greens and catch up to us. So I think there are some lessons to be learned. The other lesson, Sinclair, I'd say is a lot of the rhetoric around how we fight COVID-19 is exactly the same as for the climate emergency. Like we have to crush the curve, this rising curve of greenhouse gas emissions, right? Same as the curve in terms of infection rates for COVID-19. Elizabeth May always used to say, we need all hands on deck, right? This is an emergency. We need to take it seriously. And that's what happens. That's what happens already in the pandemic. We've all had to make sacrifices, some more than others. And I think it's the same kind of thing. We know we can do it because Canada is one of the countries that led the way. There's New Zealand, Taiwan, and then British Columbia in terms of the top performing jurisdictions in the whole world. So we know what to do. We can pull together. And if we could just apply these lessons to the climate emergency, we'd be leading the world as well. So I think there's some linkages we can make. I'm really keen on figuring out how to make sure people understand the linkage between public health and the climate emergency. And it's really clear with COVID-19, we're taking over huge wild animal terrain. We're really crushing biodiversity with our constant growth economy. So we can see that what we're doing is the direct cause of these kinds of pandemics. And the United Nations came out with a report last week saying this is going to get worse. There are going to be more wildlife to human transmission of these kinds of diseases if we continue on the way we're taking away wildlife habitat and crushing biodiversity. We're on the wrong path in terms of future pandemics. So let's tie this all together. It's about us in a constant growth economy having a terrible impact on wildlife habitat and on animals generally. And we just have to change the way we run our economy, the way we treat animals, wild and domestic. These wet markets that are so prevalent, especially in Asia, need to be reformed in a careful way. So this all ties together, and that's one of the great things about the Greens, is we do tie ideas together, we connect the dots for people. Does that answer your question?
Oh yeah.
That's great. Maybe too long. My campaign team, the other thing they say is, keep your answers short.
No, keep doing this. For groups like this,
very good. But one of the things that I liked about your last answer was that you brought in some of the things that make me a passionate green supporter, and that is green stuff. Like trees and biodiversity and orchids and all the rest of that stuff. And it seems to me that that's the one thing that always falls off the table when we actually get into campaign mode, is that the environmental stuff seems to me it has to be an essential part of being a green person.
Yeah.
I think so. That's what brought me to the Greens.
Yeah.
Because
So
I was a hiker here for 30 years, and very sad that so many of those lovely trees have gone and all the poor animals. I mean, we're taking over their habitat and
Yeah, it's terrible. Did everybody hear what was said? That we need to keep our emphasis on the environment and on our habitat and wildlife and the trees and the salmon and the orcas. That's core to the Green Party.
it is.
And I think you're right, Gail. We got off track in the last campaign. We spent a lot of time talking about other things, about abortion, separatists running for us in Quebec. Remember, the first story was about the folks in New Brunswick who came over from the NDP, how they were allegedly racist, which was very unfair. So there were a whole bunch of issues, and we saw it here on South Vancouver Island with the negative attack style campaign the NDP ran here. You know, CTV Truth Tracker called it grossly misleading. But what happened is we got taken away from our focus and our unifying focus. And I worry about it happening in this leadership race too. There are a bunch of these issues around, you know, racism, Israel, Palestine, and a whole bunch of things that are very important issues. And we need to have clear policy on them. But my pitch is let's focus on the things that unite us. Let's come out of this leadership race united, not divided, and let's build together. Because it's easy to find these ways of dividing people. Politicians, old-style politicians are very good at that, but we have to move beyond that old-style politics and towards, you know, the science is clear. It's about the science and the data. We have 5, 6, 7 years maybe before climate change is irreversible. We need action now. Let's pull together now. We can deal with the divisive issues down the road, but let's not lose focus on what the key issues are. That's a really great point. Thank you. Yeah, really great point.
So I'm really new to all of this, unfortunately. But I really like what you ladies were saying, and I was just curious, like, how closely do you, or would you work with Indigenous peoples, because it is such a passion
Yes.
for Indigenous peoples across Canada.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I've been coming into it, and yeah.
Yeah, I love that. This is near and dear to my heart, as I said earlier, right? And I'll just tell you a quick story. I used to work at the Ministry of Attorney General building on the corner of Broughton and Douglas. It's the Sussex building downtown. Craig was on my team. We worked together there. And last spring, when the blockades were on, actually it would be winter, January, February time, I went down to that building with other Indigenous protesters, and we stood outside the Ministry of Attorney General. And we figured people are going to try and sneak into the building early, so we got there very early. We were there at like 5:30, 6 o'clock. And sure enough, our deputy minister showed up at 6 o'clock thinking he would get in. And we were able to say, "Hello, Mark. Nice to see you this morning. We hope you're going to look after the Wet'suwet'en in the work of the Ministry of Attorney General, the Ministry of Solicitor General, which is responsible for the police, right?" So it was really fun to be there early with so many Indigenous activists. And I think that that's where we start making these connections, is really on the front line, so they can see that we're there with them in their fights, right? And then that starts to create the relationship, because the relationship is everything, right? And it's the same with the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation process here in Sooke. It's the relationships that really matter, showing up, and not just showing up at election time. Yeah, so I think building these relationships is key, and it's part of this larger strategy that I think the Green Party needs to adopt. We need to be like the political cutting edge for a movement of movements, where we bring in the Wet'suwet'en Strong and the Black Lives Matter. I mean, we're already close to Extinction Rebellion and the Friday Climate Strikers. They're already very much with us. A lot of those young climate strikers were knocking on our team. They've been involved in our EDA, as Diane knows very well, an active part of our riding association, our electoral district association. So we need to bridge across to these different parts of this movement of movements, and especially in Quebec. We had 500,000 people marching with Greta Thunberg in Montreal last summer, and not one seat in Quebec. It's really a shame. And so we need to figure out how to bridge from the activists to the politics, right? And pull everybody together into a movement of movements. And I think our key selling point is that Greens have always been about deep change. It's not about these incremental changes that, you know, the NDP and the Liberals have advocated, the Conservatives, of course, haven't advocated any change. They quite like it as it is, thank you very much. But the big difference on the progressive side is the Greens have always said, we need deep change and we need it now. We need to move much faster, right? And then if we can mobilize that movement of movements, including the Indigenous communities, we're in the game. And that should be our plan over the next 2 years, is how do we connect locally, you know, with the Sooke First Nation. Welcome, David and Carol. Nice to see you guys. Thanks for coming. Yeah. And how do we connect with First Nations through the Truth and Reconciliation process, on the ground, and then build a relationship over time? Fantastic question. Thank you.
Yeah, deep change is a good.
Yeah. Deep. We've been debating this. One of the things my team says is don't use that word transformational change. It sounds like you're a lawyer. so now I say deep change, and that seems to work better. And that really is what the Greens are saying. We need all hands on deck. We need to move now, because otherwise it's going to be too late.
Yeah.
And give that sense of energy and urgency around what we're doing. Michael is a marketing expert, so this is very helpful feedback. Thank you. Yeah.
Also, just to say as well, is that when you link all of these deep change things happening to our health and safety, it really links as well. It really strikes like, oh yeah, we're talking health, all our health, everybody's health, and safety to the degree. And you know, that's I just think it's a good way to get more of the message out. That's what it. That's what the province was on. And that's what the feds are on. It's like, it's all about your health, it's all about your safety, and we're here to help, and we're here, and you know, the Greens. Connecting that with the climate.
Because we all care, especially in pandemic times, about our health and our children and grandchildren's health, and
the environment.
We link it to the environment as well. These things go together. We know where the pandemic came from, and we need to be able to protect wild animals, and we need to reform the way we treat animals generally, including with our factory farming and so on. So I think these things all need to fit together. This is another thing my team tells me not to do, but I just can't resist. There's some really fantastic candidates in this race, and Dr. Courtney Howard, a doctor from the Yellowknife, has a fantastic message around the link of public health to the environment. You might want to just go on some of her websites to hear her out. She has a really great message, which I think should become a key message in our next campaign. It's about health, it's about environment, how these things fit together, and you can't just treat the symptoms. You need to look at the underlying cause of where did the pandemic come from, and how can we make sure we don't have more pandemics coming because of the way our economy works, because of the way we treat our environment, because of the way we treat animals. We have to make a big shift on all these things at once, and it's urgent.
In order to fund a lot of these deep changes, I think that we're wasting an incredible amount of money on the healthcare system, and that's impacted by the severity of the pandemic. And we've got this pharmaceutical industry running our Medicare system, and I'm hearing other parties, maybe the Greens, I'm not sure, talk about, oh, we want to make better deals with the drug companies so we can get more drugs to Canadians. But that's not the answer. The answer is looking at poor health. We're not being well served by your medical community, who are pushing the drugs, giving us our 10-15-minute appointments. We need a holistic approach. We could reduce our healthcare costs probably by a half. We weren't just pushing drugs.
Yeah.
And then we've got money to spend, and our people are healthy.
Yeah. Did everybody hear that? That we're kind of focusing on the wrong things in our health system, right? It's again treating the symptoms and not the underlying issues. And we know what the determinants of health are. A lot of it has to do with poverty, right? And addressing the situation of poor people in Canada. One in 5 kids in British Columbia grows up in poverty. And that, in a wealthy province like BC, really should never be happening, right? And if one of the reasons I'm self-medicating, and we're into a whole other cycle. So we need to stop these cycles at the start. I totally agree.
I think we're also having a lot of people self-treating themselves through Dr. Google doing their searches, finding things that their medical professionals perhaps aren't leading them towards, rather than just writing prescriptions.
Yeah, I like your approach of saying this has to be done in a holistic way, seeing the connections between all these different elements of what's good health about, as opposed to good treatment, right? Yeah. Did you have a question, Deborah?
Okay.
You're okay?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hi, you're a lawyer, you work with the Attorney General, you understand the criminal justice system. We are now going through a big change in terms of looking at institutions, long-running institutions, namely the RCMP.
Yeah.
So, you're the leader of the Green Party,
Yeah.
and these accusations and these historical things that have been happening within the RCMP in terms of racism, sexism, bullying, all that. What are you going to do about that?
Incompetence.
Yeah.
Incompetence. Put incompetence in
Incompetence.
there for our
Yeah.
good friend. What are you going to do about that?
Well, I'm so glad you asked, because did you hear the question? It was about our police forces and what are we going to do about all these problems?
We have RCMP here. We
Yeah.
have, it's
Yeah.
part of our,
Yeah.
it's everything here.
So I have a couple of stories for you. One's not a good news story. The other is a good news story. When I was in Ottawa, I worked as a lawyer in Ottawa on dispute resolution systems. And we went to the RCMP and we said, we're reading the newspaper. I was a Department of Justice lawyer at the time. And it was the same idea. Let's not deal with just the symptoms. Let's deal with the underlying culture in the RCMP, how these folks are trained, how they're hired, how they get promoted. And so we went to the RCMP and from the Dispute Resolution Office at the Ministry of the Department of Justice in Ottawa and said, we can help you with some systems change. You have a lot of issues around how you identify problems inside the RCMP and how they're resolved, how these disputes are resolved internally. And let's put in place a much earlier, informal resolution process so you identify your conflicts and your issues early and you solve them. Because they had this very hierarchical, the RCMP is a quasi-military operation, right? Very hierarchical, very rank-based. We said, let's try and create a different culture in how you resolve disputes early so that people can come to you and say, well, so-and-so was harassing me in the kitchen today and we need a solution. And it doesn't become like a lawyered up, massive, hundreds of thousands of dollars disputes to solve this thing that happened in the kitchen that shouldn't have happened, right? And so this is the bad news part of it. They were not interested at all.
Right.
Yeah. And but here's the good news. More recently, 3 or 4 years ago, I was working with the Victoria Police. They have an assertive community treatment team. If you Google Jack Knox, Victoria Times columnist, assertive community treatment, you'll see a fantastic story on this team. And it's a model for Canada, because what the police here have done is they figured we need to figure out how to treat these problems in a holistic way in our community, and we're not really the best people to do it. Sometimes we are. If somebody's wielding a gun or shooting people, we better be there. But most times it's a mental health worker, it's a social worker, it's maybe even a family member who's the best first point of contact. And so the ACT teams, the assertive community treatment teams, broke down the barriers, broke down these silos, did some problem analysis, and because our criminal justice system is a total revolving door of people coming in and out, mainly because of addictions to drugs and often linked to mental health challenges, they figured out, okay, so here's the team we need to solve these problems early in a holistic, problem-solving way, as opposed to coming in with a guns drawn kind of way. And so the police are changing over time, and Victoria Police are actually at the front end of this new culture. They're not there yet, and the RCMP is certainly not there yet, but we need to find, I believe, as a justice transformation person or a justice change person, we need to find our allies inside, the people who get it. And then we need pressure from outside, like the activists here, who will go and demonstrate. And then the most important thing, by far, is the leadership from on top. If you don't have the leadership, you can't do culture change, you can't do deep change, because it'll get blocked. And so you need sort of 2 or 3 things: allies inside, pressure from outside, and leadership from on top. When you've got it all, you can drive deep change. That's one of the reasons why I say we need more influence in Ottawa as a Green Party, because we're not relevant really in our House of Commons until we win more seats.
And one of the other things about the RCMP and many of our institutions is that they're self-monitoring,
Yeah.
and they have no public oversight, and they inspect themselves.
Yeah.
They inspect themselves.
Yeah.
So, and even now with Nova Scotia and blowing up there around the RCMP action, they needed someone to come in to inspect them, to talk to them, and it was Quebec RCMP.
Yeah.
So that is not public oversight, that is not an outside eye on things.
Yeah.
And I think that in terms of breaking in gender, gender equity, in terms of racism, in terms of all of the things that we identify as different in our society, they need to be reflected in our institutions. They are not in the criminal justice system, right from, well, the jails are full of Inuit and indigenous people,
black people,
the court systems, how they're stagnating, and all of these things are linked. And I kind of like to think that there's a stronger look of eyes on this to make the deep change right through. I think they want it. I think that's there. I'd like to see the Green Party take a good, strong action, look at that. And not just the criminal justice system, RCMP, but the criminal justice system, our education system. Look at Ontario. Like we're all being streaming, and then looking at the numbers, and then they're streaming kids according to skin color. In 2020, I mean, it's just nuts. No, it's a crime. It's a crime. So these systems need to be broken wide open. Take a look at them.
There are other candidates in this race saying we have to abolish the police or defund the police, and that's only a small part of the problem. As you say, it's the courts, it's the legal professions, all of them. We have deep problems of systemic racism, and it's not just there. As you say, education system. Indigenous people won't go to our healthcare system, right? They can feel the racism there too, and so it is. So we have a massive challenge. And the way to deal with massive challenges is break them up into pieces and figure out.
Just like the fossil fuel industry, start looking at this.
And we all have to be part of the solution. But it's much more complicated than saying, oh, we'll just abolish the police. That's not the solution.
No.
And what it does is it actually alienates potential allies inside the system that we need to really drive change.
If you go out there and do a survey of 500 people, just let's walk randomly and do it right now, and put that slogan to them. 499 of them will say, "Are you insane?"
What slogan? Defund police?
Abolish the police. There's two slogans. I can understand the defund one because what they're really saying is let's reallocate resources to mental health resources and so on. That kind of makes sense to me. But there are actually people in the leadership race saying we're going to abolish the police, and I'm thinking, that really is not going to. That's not going to resonate well with 499 out of 500 Canadians, as Michael was saying.
Or even defund, because you then have to explain what you mean.
What you mean,
And if you have to explain it, it's not a good term.
As soon as you're explaining, you're behind.
But the change helps that, because it really does we have to figure out why we have so many Indigenous people sitting and rotting in our jails. And our school system showing the same. And our criminal justice system is the same. So it's not about abolishing it, but it's a really
deep change. The biggest tragedy is that we are now taking more kids away from Indigenous families than we were during the residential school era. That's really the huge tragedy in the Indigenous communities. Over 50% of kids in care in British Columbia are Indigenous kids, and they're roughly 4% of the entire population. We're doing more. The 60s scoop, the terrible history, is being repeated.
Which just points out how it needs to be deep change among social workers, and
the system.
They say that that's the kind of support and services they need. And it turns out to be the exact wrong thing.
I believe deeply that we need to figure out how to empower the Indigenous communities themselves to make these decisions, and empowerment includes the right resources to do it. We pay significant sums to foster parents who take the kids on, which is fantastic. The foster parents have a tough job, but let's put that money into the aunts and the uncles and the others who are in the community, and then combine that with a guaranteed livable income, and then we'll be starting to solve the underlying problem here, which so often is about poverty.
And we'll save a whole bunch of money.
Yes,
because
that's
the money's coming back to us. Rather than to.
It's in our community. And that's exactly right. Other questions or comments? I don't want to keep people too long. I see us being here another 10, 15 minutes. I'll be here until the last person leaves, but I also don't want to overstay my welcome.
David, I have a comment.
Yes.
Like many, kind of a little bit cynical, maybe, about the possibility of deep change. I graduated
in 97 with First Nations structuralist, feminist social work degree. That's what it was. I mean, like that was like heavy duty. The Gove report came out in 97. It's been shelved. Like there's a systemic structural change that has to happen, and all the words are not going to do that. The people are going to do that, and it's not going to be pretty because nobody in the center wants to move, so the people in the margins can go in the center. So if money is profit, if our economy and our life is based on and fired and driven by infinite growth,
Really
so
good.
unless we change that
Yeah.
and get some equity in our economy and not have like house building as an indicator and deal with the issues, things aren't going to change.
Yeah.
Because it's good. We get a lot of lip service and a lot of doing this and this and this, but nothing really. And you're going to work your ass off. We're going to work our ass off, and we're going to lose.
Yeah.
Because I don't want this to happen, but I see it because we don't have the funds.
Yeah.
So I see making it really, really uncomfortable
Yeah.
for people who don't put their efforts and their money towards environment, healthcare. Like make it so that it's shameful, like, I don't know, smoking and not wearing your seatbelt.
Yeah.
Or not wearing your
wearing your
mask.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Making it bad.
Yeah.
These are people I do not admire, our society does not admire. We still hold them up as leaders.
Yeah.
This is something that we have to address and strongly. You know me, I'm willing to go to jail for it.
Yeah.
And I have,
Yeah.
twice.
Yeah.
And it's right.
Yeah.
There were most First Nations women in that jail.
Yeah.
Both times. And for absolutely horrific, and it's social upheaval. But it's not going to say, keep on saying it's not going to change, and I stand behind it and I will do. But it's a structural change that needs to happen.
Yeah.
And we have to get the people in the middle to move, but I don't know how we're going to do that peacefully.
Yeah.
So, there you
Really
go. That was my little 2 cents.
Great
for-
comments. Did everybody hear? Yeah. And I think one of the things you said is about our economy, and we need to really look at how our capitalist economy is functioning, and it's part of this constant growth problem. And other countries, like New Zealand, are really taking it on and saying we need to look at health and well-being as our key measures. It's not about gross domestic product growth all the time, which is still what we do here in Canada, right? We really need to focus on a fundamentally different way of looking at our economy. And there are a couple of people in this race, and you might actually be interested in looking them up. We have a socialist woman in Montreal, an eco-socialist from Montreal as well, who are saying we need fundamental change in the whole economy. I don't agree with that because I think the most urgent thing is the environment, and changing a capitalist economy to a socialist economy is going to be a long-term project. As you say, it's going to be very difficult to achieve such deep change fast, and we only have 5 or 6 or 7 years. So I think I'm a fan of working within a capitalist economy, but looking at the best countries like New Zealand and saying, and Bhutan and Nepal and some of these other countries that are really changing how they measure success and how they allocate government priorities. And for us, it's clear, we've always campaigned on this for Greens. Let's cut the waste, let's cut the fossil fuel subsidies, let's cut the $1 billion F-35 fighter jets. We've always campaigned on these massive spending programs that are going in the wrong direction, right? And I think if we can get into Ottawa and get an influence on where we spend our money, the money is the key. If we spend it on people and not on these crazy, crazy expenditures driven by old ideas, then we can start moving faster. But I totally get, like I worked in public service for 28 years. I totally get what you're talking about. It's so hard to make change. Even at a relatively senior level in the public service, you have to go around your bosses, you have to go straight to the minister, the people in the middle get really mad at you, the judges and lawyers hate it, they complain to your bosses. So I've been through it. I know exactly what you're talking about, but it can be done. Like the transformational change we did here in BC, I should use deep change, shouldn't I? Deep change we did here in BC was all about figuring out how to get away from the senior judges and lawyers who control the system, and even my bosses, the senior bureaucrats, and get outside ideas and voices in, and even outside money. And we went to the office of the Chief Information Officer, and we managed to convince them to give us $10 million. And we went around, we went to our minister and said, Minister, you're going to love this. Nobody else will love it. The judges and lawyers will hate it, but you're going to love it. and she was convinced. And I think it's important that it was a she, and that she wasn't a lawyer. Some of you may know Shirley Bond, extremely conservative person, but she wanted deep change. So we need to get leadership from on top. We need allies on the side, and we need people to unite around deep change. And we had people flying in from Singapore, the United Kingdom, United States to see how did BC crack the code on justice transformation. Nobody ever changes anything in the justice system, right? It's always been the same since 200 years.
And what was the change?
And the change was, thank you for the coaching. If you Google the Civil Resolution Tribunal, it now resolves all condominium disputes, all small claims, and almost all motor vehicle accidents in BC. And it was a deep change in how disputes are resolved around motor vehicle accidents disputes, ICBC disputes, and all these things. And it's the only part of our justice system that kept working through the pandemic, because so much of it was online, by phone, early resolution, no judges and lawyers, completely different system. And people were able to keep going through the Civil Resolution Tribunal without the powers that be forcing them into the old ways of doing stuff.
I say, I don't know how much the Restorative Justice Circle works with youth, but I know in Australia and New Zealand it's a big time, and you just don't take children anywhere near the courts.
No.
And I don't know how that's happening now, but if it is, I'm happy.
Yeah.
But it's such a good alternative.
Yeah.
And good for everybody: victims, perpetrators, communities, neighbors, family members, even workers.
That's exactly right. The last thing I did at the Ministry of Attorney General was attempt to set up Indigenous-run tribunals with entirely staffed by Indigenous people, certainly with Indigenous tribunal chairs and tribunal members, and have it as a separate system. It would eventually connect with our justice system, because at the end of the day we have one justice system, but there would be a huge amount of space here to bring in local experts who know the kids, who know the parents, who know where the aunts and uncles are, and who really are community based. And I think that is a solution, take it entirely out of our court system, because that is a system that is for 200 years hasn't changed. And so we can't count on it to change now.
It hasn't been successful either.
No, it's been a disaster. This adversarial spirit that infuses our justice system is part of this problem. It's a colonial mentality, an adversarial mentality, and it's much, much easier. Buckminster Fuller, the change expert, said, build a system over here and replace this system, because this one is so much better. And that's what we did with the Civil Resolution Tribunal. Sorry, a bit of a long answer, but you're talking about a thing I care very much about. And one of the reasons Trump got elected, I'm convinced, in the United States, is people in the States have this same feeling. It's useless. We can't make change happen. Nobody listens to us. We're jobless. Our jobs have gone offshore. We're going to elect a joker like Trump because we're so mad. It was the same thing with Brexit. I think Brexit didn't go through because there were so many people in England who just said, forget it. We're just going to vote because we don't care if we break things up a little bit. We need to break things up. And I think that's part of this populist rhetoric that connects. And the Greens need to figure out how can we connect with people in a populist way, but also be really responsible and have actual plans that work. So it's not just about breaking things down, it's about building this part up.
Very much so, not just theoretical.
Yeah, it has to be practical. Yeah.
I have another rant. It's just one more, and it's a big one. It's the Department of Fisheries, the DFO.
Oh yeah.
And we are facing, if not, we are full on in the crisis out here with the state of our salmon. And it's a perfect storm. You know, the tributaries and the small freshwater habitat that salmon require have been destroyed with our improper logging. We have a warming ocean, which makes it really, really tough. And more acidity. We have the famous collapse at the Fraser River. We have the Pacific Foundation coming out and saying it's pretty much over. And we have politicians weeping, you know, at the legislative buildings because they're trying to figure out how to get the premier to understand that the salmon is on collapse. So where the hell do we go with it? What do you do? What do we do? How? Is it still, you know, there's no boats out there, there's nothing going on. It's flying. That fabulous international resource killed, you know. So where are we going to go with that? As a Green Party, as a leader, as members, as people who care.
Yeah. It's such a complicated problem. It's kind of like the health question and Indigenous children. There's so many overlapping parts of it. It's huge. I put
And the whales. You know,
yeah, it's linked to the orcas. It's linked to
Fish farm?
fish farming.
farms didn't even get
Yeah,
there.
the demonstration yesterday at the legislature steps at noon with Chief George from Cabell River was about fish farms. Yeah, so there's so many aspects linked to it. On the hopeful side, I'm really, really hopeful that community organizations and funding community organizations that are action oriented, you know, like the folks who are working on restocking the salmon stocks here in Sooke are doing unbelievable work with no money at all from the federal government, right? They do it all as volunteer labor. A small investment in that group and all the groups up and down the coast in BC would help with part of the problem.
But even that is genetically not diverse enough to handle our salmon. It's just the standard size they want to catch.
Yeah.
You know, that's pretty harsh. But you know, it's not about just giving more money to the fishery enhancement societies because they don't have the genetic diversity that creates what's so beautiful out there.
Yeah, and what the Washington State folks are doing and the Americans are doing are saying you can only catch these genetically similar salmon. You have to release all the wild salmon. And how do you know? Because we clip the fins, right?
Yeah.
So we need to have, as you say, we need to make sure we protect the biodiversity while also increasing the stocks. But that's just one local example here in Sooke about what needs to be done. And it has to be done nationally. We've been through this with the cod fishery on the East Coast, right? A total collapse. It looks like we're heading the same way with the salmon.
40 years.
Yeah, let's learn the lessons. They still haven't recovered in Eastern Canada. And it looks like that's what's ahead for us right now. It's a total tragedy. And it's going to end, I think, in the extinction of the southern resident killer whales, especially with the Kinder Morgan pipeline going through and 300 more tankers coming through a year.
What? It's not going through, is it?
It looks like it will go through.
It's not going through, David.
We're going to be there on the front lines.
Put that out there.
That's very good.
Have you given up?
No.
Have you given up?
That's very good.
Who's given up on the pipeline and 7 times more tankers? Are we still strong on this?
That's good. Yeah.
Nobody talks about that tankers that are going to be out there. Possibly nobody's buying the oil, so they're going to store them on the friggin' tankers until they spill.
Yeah.
Come
In
on.
the Gulf Island.
This is the XL just got like that back and forth, in and out
Yeah.
like a horny goat. But it's not going to go through, and other pipelines are not going to go through. But at the same time, people are going to be frightened. So at the same time, it's up for leaders and us. What are we going to do instead? Don't frighten these people. We're in tough time by somebody who's in Alberta, who's leading Alberta, who's coming out with the most outrageous, landishes. I'm on a rant, aren't I? I'm so sorry,
Keep
but
going.
he's doing so trumpy that I want to write all my family members, Brian's brothers and sisters, and say, I'm really worried for you. Because environmental standards, it's like oversight, dawn, hell, this, 10,000 fine, jail time, civil liberties, and we're going to get that pipeline going. And I think I can, if Trump doesn't get in, I can talk Joe Biden into doing it. What the hell is he thinking? He's dangerous.
Yeah.
We have to address that for Albertan family because I feel so bad for them. You go, Gail, go.
I'm not afraid of Alberta. I'm afraid of the politicians in British Columbia that aren't standing up for what British Columbians feel for the most. And this is the problem: is that the politicians, once they, I'm sure you're going to be different.
No,
Politicians, when they get into power, they all of a sudden shift from something that sounds reasonable to something that sounds crazy. And we have fish farms that should be out of the waters yesterday, and they're still there. We have they're still tearing down, despite their supposed regulations that they're supposed to leave a safety zone around the wetlands in the creeks. They're still cutting right down to the creek bed and destroying the creeks. They're still doing all this stuff. The government is still allowing more ancient growth forest to be cut down now than there was under the previous government. Yep. And it's just going downhill so fast. I do not know whether we can turn it around.
Yeah.
And these are people that supposedly were supposed to make change.
Yeah.
And nothing
no
is
Site
happening.
C, all these promises. Yeah.
It's perfect storm that's rolling right through to us, you know? And it's like, where do we start? How do we hold it? Sorry, Sinclair.
That's okay. I've been watching international politics as I always do, and governments have been shoveling money out the door, and with the exception of China, not one Western government, and these are the biggest historic, some of the biggest historic expenditures, have put 1 cent into a green transformation. So that doesn't seem to be on the agenda for at least capitalist countries.
You know, the European Commission has come out with I think it's a €1 trillion plan for transformation. So they at least have a plan, and they say they're going to spend the money. But as you say, we need to see it happening now.
Yeah, well, let's see what happens with that, and I hope that things will move forward.
Yeah.
But when you look at a national level, not much is happening right now.
With COVID-19,
$1 billion used to be a significant amount of money, and now it's $1 trillion.
Yeah.
But the other thing I was thinking is one thing that is being considered is and there are lots of names for it, the guaranteed livable income. And one thing that appears to be more and more clear is as we come out of this COVID crisis, there are going to be fewer small businesses, there's going to be considerably greater inequality. The system just keeps going in the same historic direction. And there is support for thinking part of that idea as an overall solution in different ways, and everything depends upon the application. But is there any opportunity in Canada for that going forward?
are you talking about for small businesses or?
No, I'm talking about the universal guaranteed income.
Oh, sorry. Okay, got it. Yes, for sure. I mean, the fact the NDP have finally come on board with us on that is a really good sign. And I think there are even people in the federal Liberal Party who are fans of it as well. But this is going to sound like a typical politician. The best way to make sure that people get it is to win green seats in the next election. And I think we should actually make guaranteed livable income one of our top 3 priorities. I'd say top one is obviously climate emergency, as Gail said earlier, and all the just transition plans. But guaranteed livable income is at the heart of that just transition, leaving no one behind, because that's sort of the floor, the safety net. So I really see guaranteed livable income as being a very popular idea. Just like saying abolish police is very unpopular, guaranteed livable income right now is very popular, especially when even conservatives can say, oh, this is less expensive than the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, and it's more fair and comprehensive, one bureaucracy. It's so obviously the right thing to do now. I'm very, very hopeful, and I think we should highlight that as a key campaign priority for us. The other one I would say, of course, is proportional representation. I see that as a key priority for us as well. But climate emergency has to be number one. And sort of... Sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to add one quick thing. That was my big concern during the last election, and Diane and some other people tried to see if we could get the party to hone in on, and we didn't even care what they were, let's say 3 major campaign objectives.
Yes.
Which didn't happen. Is that going to happen in this next election?
I think we really learned a lot from this last campaign. We had a 92-page platform. It was actually really good. It was the best platform, but how many of you actually read it? You don't have to put up here how you did. Sinclair did. I mean, really? And we've got to figure out how we focus down our messages to 2 or 3. The other thing is, we have a whole bunch of PhDs and master's people and lawyers, writing these things. We need to make it at a grade 6 level. That's how we did all our transformation work inside the bureaucracy. Whenever we dealt with the public, we had our professional writers who knew how to write at a grade 6 level. So we said, I'm a lawyer, I better not be writing this, here's a first draft, and they'd give it back to us, completely different, but way more understandable, right? So we need to think like communicators, not like policy experts, and the Greens are full of policy experts. The survey on the recovery, the pandemic. Right now they have a very brown recovery plan. We need a green recovery.
Yeah, a lot of people still see the Greens as like a one-issue party. As leader, how will you change that and increase Green support?
So this is the real tension in our messaging, right? We're seen as the one-issue party. We used to be seen as a one-person party. And so how do we get past that? And I think the key thing is about showing the linkages, showing that the reason we have these pandemics is because wild animals are being forced into smaller and smaller parts of our world, and they're being sold for food in these wet markets. We know we can't keep going in this direction. It's just going to get worse. If you care about human health, you have to care about the wild animals and habitat and so on. And if you don't change the way, what we value in our economy, this constant growth economy, we're not going to change this imminent climate emergency. And we need to build to that. Some people say, you know, we're the sky is falling party as well. We're always scaring people. So we also need a message of hope. So as soon as we say these things, we need to go, and we have a plan. We have a positive plan on how to do it. We call it the just transition. And it's about renewables. And it's about an east-west electrical grid powered by renewables. And we have a transportation strategy that relates to that. And we show how we connect the dots. But even that is getting a little long. It has to be really short and clear. The last thing is, it has to relate directly to the audience we're talking to. So here in Sooke, this audience totally gets the climate emergency. When I was in Regina, Saskatchewan, the Greens there have a lot of different concerns because they're listening to their community. So we need to enable, and the same thing in Quebec. The folks in Quebec, I think I mentioned earlier, I went to Quebec in November and met with 50 candidates and campaign managers. They were so angry because they said the Green Party is not connecting with people in Quebec. First of all, we're not connecting in French. Our leader doesn't really speak French. And secondly, our messaging is all wrong. It has to be really clearly focused on what unites Quebecers, which is fighting pipelines, right? And protecting the belugas. And so it's a different language, and we need to be really specific where we are so we resonate with the audience. It's a bit of a long answer to say we need to, first of all, listen, understand our community, and then communicate about community concerns. Right. So here it's salmon, and it's orcas, and it's wildlife, and it's clear-cut forestry. We know that because we live here, right? But the National Green Party has to have its message locally as well. That's the key to good messages, is connecting with your audience on the things they care about.
The same thing needs to apply provincially and municipally. We need to have locally focused campaigns.
Yes, and we need to unite because the NDP are integrated federally, provincially, municipally, right? Often municipally. But we need to do the same thing. We need to figure out how to work together as progressives who care about the environment. Yeah. Do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm a little confused, which is normal for me. I find that in this message you're trying to be all things to all people. Yeah. And I used to be a salesman. One of the fundamental principles of being a good salesman was only sell something that is in their interest to buy. And I think if you could shorten your message down, you will have a good name, a good reputation, and your principles are good. But trying to be all things to all people might not be working.
Yeah, good advice. Did you all hear that?
No.
Yeah.
In sales, a key principle is you can't be all things to all people.
That's good.
And so you need to really focus your message down. And the Green Party has a reputation for being an ethical party, a party with integrity. It's always focused from day one in 1983 on the environment, and that's our core message. So it's tricky because in some ways, I think you're right. We do try and appeal to a broad range of Canadians. We've got to 1.1 million Canadians now, and the key question is how do we get to 2 or 3 without losing our core message, right?
But that's how you do it, is by relating the messages in that core message to the local concerns.
Yeah.
And I don't think, the bottom line is if we're right, a healthy environment is what's going to protect our economy in the future.
Yeah.
And it's going to protect our health in the future. So the messaging is there. It's just trying to figure out how to do that at the community level.
Yeah.
So that you're talking to them about a message that is common, but it's reflecting down into a community.
Yeah. We have to connect the dots in a clear way. There are a bunch of dots that link up these ideas, and we need to make sure that the dots are clear. and we're laying them out in a really simple, clear, consistent way that resonates in the community.
David, you were talking about, making connections. There's a lot of people talking about lessons learned, COVID lessons. For instance, a young family in Nanaimo, I was talking to my friend and her young family, and she said this is really hard. She has a 9-year-old, a 13-year-old, she's a teacher, so she pretty well, got stuck at home and no job. But she said, I'm really proud of my family. We have learned to live small. We have learned to have a very small footprint, and it's almost like a game now. How smoothly and easily we can live. We haven't been to any fast food. We haven't been to shopping. Like, we're doing pretty well, shopping once a week. She was so proud of her family doing that, and she was talking about she was connecting it to the environment. Her experience of COVID-19 with her family, she was doing exactly the connection to the environment. How good her life was, it was helping the environment more. All of us experienced this, bird song, more animal, like it
Less
was
traffic,
that.
yeah.
But even more, I think our priorities of what is important, that changed.
Yeah.
Our families are important. Our environment is important. Our air is important. Our water is important. I think we shift a little paradigm shift because of this, and we're not through it, not even close to through it, right? And we got lots to learn from what we're doing as far as community building, taking care of each other, being local power, that kind of thing. I think people could quite well be listening to your message, because that's the lessons we learned from COVID. Nobody said, yay, I'm going to go into business and make a lot of money. No, it's how to live beautifully in our world, in our communities. Maybe we'll go back to people don't travel much more than 50 miles from their place. If that has to be, or we can only travel once a year. We do what we're told, kind of, in Canada, right? So I think there's lots of lessons for you as a leader and a politician to learn from the lessons learned. And I'll just tell you, Transition Sooke is having a lessons learned picnic on July 19th at near the golf course where they have the Saturday market now.
Oh yeah.
I don't know what it's called. Is that the municipal park? So if people want to gather and share their COVID lessons and how we can then move those into political power change.
Yeah.
So,
that's great.
It might be something that.
Transition Sooke seems to be really doing a great job.
Yeah.
We also have a person who's on the Sooke Environment Committee here, Diane, and these are the local organizations that create these networks. I totally agree. It needs to start at the community level, I think, and then we need to connect the dots between the national politics and the community level.
I think if you hear those lessons, it might help get some ideas about, wording, what people say.
Yeah.
What have you learned?
Yeah.
Your energy is unbelievable. I need to say something here, and that is about the comment that we need to speak to them as if they're a bunch of grade sixers.
Say again?
We need to speak to people as if they're an uneducated group of grade sixers.
Unfortunately, this is true.
No,
You better not have anybody here.
It's about the matter. It's about clarity. It's about understanding of community. It's about a sophistication, and about making the message the perfect one that gets across. And some people do it rather well. Some people, we go about it, we have to explain everything. So when I hear that, I cringe.
Okay, good.
And I just want to say, David, that just kind of...
We have to be careful how we say that.
They're a bunch of
Or don't say it at all. Yeah.
You don't know, find
10
another
words
way.
is good.
10 words, short, sweet,
Simple,
single syllables.
Yeah.
It's better to say it that way. Okay, thank you for the feedback. That's good. That's good.
Well, there is quite an element in simplicity, and I think that you seem to have the idea that we are running to form the next government. Perhaps a more practical way would be to say that if we get elected in quantity, we'll be holding their feet up to the fire, that they perform to what their expectations are, or perhaps imagination, but promises, which of course they don't do.
Yeah. Did you hear that? It's about what is our rhetoric around forming the next government? and I get so much different advice on this. I'd actually love your advice. People say, David, you have to campaign in a confident way. You should be talking like you're the next Prime Minister of Canada. And there are other people who say, you sound like a nut whenever you say that. You sound like you're going to lose credibility, and why would anybody vote for somebody who's so delusional? So, so I'm getting advice from both sides on this.
And you're a white male.
And I'm a white male, so it's one of those. So here's how I try and deal with that problem. Is I say, we need to set an ambitious target. You know, say we're going to form the next government, but if we don't get there, then we want to form the balance of power. And if we don't get there, we want to be an official party in Parliament, 12 seats. So that's sort of my compromise on that, but I'm trying to be all things to all people.
Yeah, but then comes into another element of credibility.
Yeah.
Which is probably more of an element than even making a statement.
Yeah. We have to stay credible because there's such a high degree, this was the point here, was we need to be credible. There's such a high degree of cynicism that coming across like you don't get it or you're overly ambitious or whatever is very risky. So I take the point. Thank you for the feedback. Yeah, very good point. So we are now at 5 to 12. I can't believe it. Time flies when you're having fun.
He asked a good question.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, thanks. I missed you.
I'll make it quick.
Yeah, no,
so
last question.
Talking about federal, provincial, and you want a municipal level. So it's kind of got me thinking about building codes. Because I work in the trades,
right.
And when you talk to other people in the trades, I think I'm the only one that says, yeah, I consistently vote green. And they go, oh, green's going to kill us, green is going to kill us. And that is like the ongoing thing. And yet people don't realize that our building codes have become consistently more green.
Yeah.
Because green is more economically feasible. People don't realize that.
Yeah.
So I was kind of just curious about particularly the green stance on building crisis, you could call it, the building boom, or basically tradespeople.
Yeah. We really have to be careful about not being the party of no, right?
Yeah, being the party of this is cheaper and better.
Yeah, this is cheaper and better, and not cheaper in terms of less quality. It's cheaper over the long run because you're building better, right? And this is going to save us money down the road, right? And we need to really be careful about our message around that because it's so easy to say, oh, the Greens are the party of no, no development, you know, and no jobs, and yeah. So I totally agree, and we need to talk in a hopeful way about, you know, this is so much better if we build in quality at the start. It's better for the people who are purchasing the home, right? And it has long-term economic benefits and environmental benefits too.
So, I mean, I imagine there's not a whole lot of builders here, but like the building code has gotten more and more green.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of things I won't get into.
Yeah.
A lot of people that don't vote green vote NDP. Like there are a lot of NDP carpenters out there, right?
Yeah.
And they think it's just better, but I mean, without trying to throw stones at the NDP, their approach in this is get more engineers involved. And engineers are a lot like lawyers when it comes to building. They put a check on something, but they don't really have a value add.
Yeah.
And I would love to see if the Greens said, you know, we want to kind of divorce big ticket buildings while not changing the code. I don't need an engineer to sign off on putting a roof on a building. You know how to do that for thousands of years. You know, and so I'd just almost like to see the Green Party deregulate the engineering side of things for small houses, not for big things.
Yeah.
And almost go back to the way it was going before we started seeing the NDP come in.
Yeah.
In my little sector, because it's gotten to the point where 20% of your building's build cost is consulting fees, which don't do anything.
Yeah.
And
that's really good feedback. I appreciate that. Sinclair raised the issue of small business before in the context of guaranteed livable income, and I think the Greens have always framed ourselves as the party of small business, cutting red tape. We campaigned in the last election on cutting taxes for small businesses.
Right.
We said the large corporations will raise their taxes. So I think making sure we keep that alive inside the Green Party on we're the party of cutting red tape for small business.
Well, a lot of carpenters these days are losing money to engineering costs and surveying costs. And I mean, some of that is needed. I'm not saying get rid of all of it.
Yeah.
You need to survey land. But when you see, like, I did a job a couple years ago where we had to spend $2,000 to get a roof stamp to build a deck. And what we were told to do wasn't to build a code, it wasn't structurally sound. So we did what all these engineers told us to do, but then we did what actually held the building together as well, which is kind of stupid. We spent $5,000 for stamps, right? And
it's the same,
really
you mentioned the lawyers, it's the same thing with our legal system and our lawyers and our courts. I mean,
it's a lot of things.
Any of you who have probated a will will know.
Pushing the blame and covering your butts, right? And a lot of that just gets rid of through common sense, people at the ground level taking the initiative. And I think that's taken away from a lot of people.
Thank you for the feedback. Really great. Yeah, really great feedback. So we're coming up to noon, and I'm just going to conclude with a few remarks. I'm getting the signal from Annemiek. These poor people don't want to hear you going on and on forever. Thank you, Annemiek. I'm going to say thank you to all of you for coming out on a Saturday, or Sunday. It's Sunday today. On a Sunday morning. Really appreciate you coming out. The last thing I'll say is if you go to davidmerner.com, click on volunteer. We're really looking for phoners. We're calling across the country on our phones. We just have a new call hub system if you want to do phoning for us. We have lots of different things. We need writers too. We're putting out a weekly newsletter and we're creating a new website. So if you click on volunteer, we'd love to have you. davidmerner.com, click on volunteer. But it might even be easier to donate. And donations are really critical. No amount is too small. And I'm sorry to say there is a cap on donations. You can't donate more than $1,625. But you're very welcome to donate that. Yes, that was supposed to be a joke. But whatever you can donate, small or large, we really appreciate. And let's stay in touch. My email address is davidmerner@shaw.ca. It's very easy to remember. Feel free to email me, especially if you see things that make you angry. You say, we shouldn't be doing this. Let me know. I'd love to hear. I post a lot on Facebook, and a lot of it is from people telling me, hey, you should pay attention to this issue. So thank you again for coming out. I really appreciate it. And let's do this again soon, maybe in the federal election that's coming up in the fall. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Thank you. See you later. Thanks. Bye.
Can I just borrow your spot for? We talked about it for Zoom when you were planning the Zoom meeting, but then we didn't talk about me talking to everyone here.
Oh yeah, do you want to say something?
Yes.
Yeah.
If
Yeah. Okay. Okay. See you later. Bye. Bye. Yeah, group photos, a great idea. And maybe Nick, you can do that.